You hit a degree of stardom or success in WCW, and then you had another stop in one of like the bigger indies, and then you showed up in WWE. And I remember this as a kid. You showed up as Mankind. There were these
Yeah,
vignettes. They had you feuding with top stars, really. Like I think it was Undertaker, or someone pretty elevated
it
immediately.
was Undertaker. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was watching this and being like, so I'll tell you what I thought as a kid. I'd be like, holy shit, Cactus Jack is now mankind in WWE and he's feuding with the Undertaker. So that that this gets interesting. That must have felt like hitting the big time as like a wrestler coming up. And you went through a freaking grind to get there. I mean, you went through a lot of indies, like a lot of wear and tear. So what was it like when you were premiering in WWE? Which must have been a culmination of a childhood dream at that point.
It was pretty terrifying. You know what? Maybe for the sake of your viewers, I will show them what Mankind looked like. All right.
Yeah, yeah,
So
please.
the Mankind character. Now, the mask wasn't an Amazon something you could order on Amazon. It was a leather mask, and my hair was long at that time, kind of wild. And so, and it was this character where I realized that by only shielding, by obscuring part of my face, I could make facial expressions work for me with sideward glances and things like that. And it also prevented people from really seeing deep down into my eyes, which were, they say they're the window to the soul. So I would say it was about every 6 months, especially because I was clearly putting my body on the line. And when WWE came out and announced that wrestling was entertainment, not competition, a lot of people thought it was going to be the death knell for the business. But now, especially with the success of UFC and MMA in general, had we continued to promote what we did as being the real deal, and then people saw that you can't do an Irish whip. Like you've never seen an Irish whip into the octagon or an elbow drop or any of those things. But by allowing people to appreciate it for what it was instead of knocking it for what it was not, people could see, all right, this guy's really putting his body on the line for our entertainment. And then there was almost this like telltale moment, usually 6 months in, where they would see through or past the character and be like, I think he's a nice guy. And so it was hard to deny when I was doing so many things for people's entertainment that I really cared about what I did. And that I think people drew the conclusion that I was a nice guy, and that Mankind with that mask, Andrew, it allowed me at first, I disliked it immensely to the point where
So was this a character that WWE said, "Hey, you're going to show up, and here's a mask. Here's like a persona."
This is what happened. I went to visit Mr. McMahon, and he had this illustration of a character with a mask that looked more like Leonardo DiCaprio in The Man in the Iron Mask. And what happened a year or so earlier, The Undertaker had suffered a fractured orbital bone in a match. And instead of just taking time off like a normal human being would, he wanted to continue wrestling, but they needed something to protect that bone. They came up with a bunch of drawings, and one of them that was not used, but that Mr. McMahon liked, was the template for what would later become the Mankind mask. So he had this idea in his head of a mask, or he had an idea on paper of a mask, and Jim Ross, who was the president or executive in charge of talent relations, had been, steadily trumpeting me as a potential talent, but Vince McMahon did not see me as looking like a star. So Bruce Pritchard told me this story only about 6 or 7 years ago. For had I known it in 1995 when I first met with Mr. McMahon, my feelings would have been hurt. He said that, my name came up, and then Vince, he slammed his hand down on the table and said, "All right, damn it, I'll bring him in, but I'm covering up his face." And that was how I gained entry. Harsh. That was how I gained my entry into WWE. But I have to believe that Undertaker got on board and saw me. He knew me from WCW in 1990 and followed my career, and felt like, although I was not as tall, not nearly as tall or big as him, that we could have a great a feud based on like psychological warfare. And so without the Undertaker, again, you and I are not having this conversation.
Yeah, so you have this legendary feud with The Undertaker with that results in this Hell in a Cell match where you get thrown off the top of the cage, and it's a legitimate like 3-story drop or something, where like while watching it,
it was 16 feet, like people said 40, 50 feet. My goodness. And it might as well have been 40 or 50 feet when I was up there looking down, because the people genuinely looked like ants down below. I couldn't believe, I was terrified. I was really terrified. And I had told Mr. McMahon that I'd been up there in the afternoon. I was comfortable, but the truth is I'd never gone up there. And while I was looking down, the Undertaker's music hit, and I know that every eyeball in the place is going to be on him. And I looked over the top. Oh man! And Andrew, like, I rarely curse in real life, but I think in curses, and all I was thinking was, "You got to be blanking kidding me! There's no blanking way!" And the entire time he was making his way to the ring, I was thinking, "How can I climb down this cell without destroying my career?" And I couldn't think of how to do that. So I just stayed up there and hoped for the best.
So you wind up taking this incredible bump off of the top of the cell. You land on a table. And then there is this now iconic image of you. And it seems like a tooth is somehow like gone through your lip, but it looks like you're smiling. And that really emblazoned itself in the minds of a lot of wrestling fans. You were like, this person is so committed that it seems like there's some kind of like dental surgery on offer, and they seem to be enjoying it. At least that was the impression.
Well, that definitely was. Can I take you behind the scenes as to what I was actually aiming for? I was out of it. It was only about 2 years ago that I saw The Undertaker. We were doing an appearance together in the United Kingdom. And I said, how did I manage to let you know that I thought I could continue? Because he leaned over, and there's a saying in WWN and wrestling, go home means, this is go to the finish. And he just said, go home. And under any normal circumstance, I would have thought that I would have, first of all, followed whatever The Undertaker said. But on that one night, I don't know, something made me feel like I was capable of continuing. And he said, I just kind of mumbled like, I'm okay. And so he went old school. You might know what that means. The Undertaker's 6'10", 320 pounds, or maybe around there. He may have been high 200s, 290, 295, because we do exaggerate a little bit. He was probably 6'8", 290 in real life, but a massive man. And he took me by the wrist. He started walking across the top rope. It usually comes off with a big forearm. And as I mentioned, I was limited physically, but I usually really played it up. I'd be wildly thrashing, with my arms and body motion. And that video just shows me just like a big sloth just standing there. But I knocked him off the top rope. And when he went down and sold, as we say in the trade, like the cobwebs started dissipating. And I started getting a grip on where I was. And I realized that, what happened, he chokeslammed me through the cell. Neither one of us thought that the cell was going to give way like it did. And so I crashed through and I was knocked unconscious. And there was now this is where we know medical modern science and what we've learned about concussions. If that were to happen in the modern day WWE, they just stop the match. And that's the right move. But fortunately, in a weird way, that was not the move that day, because we had this incredibly surreal experience where we're trying to piece together a match when one of the participants is no longer conscious. And so there was this whole world that went on during the 42 seconds I was out.
So you're saying that that neither of you knew that the cell was going to give? That you were just supposed to be at the top of that cage?
We thought it was going to gradually tear, so that the last thing I said to him before we went out to the ring was, you might have to choke slam me 5 or 6 times before this thing starts to give. And instead, I went through that thing like a knife through butter. And the chair that I brought up on top of that structure followed me down, hit me in the face, so that, as I said, I collapsed. The cobwebs started to dissipate, and I was kind of like sitting against the bottom and second turnbuckles. And I realized I had this big wound underneath my lip. And I just thought to myself, if you could find a way to take your tongue and stick it through that massive wound and wriggle it.
This is terrible.
Like even then, I was like, oh, that's going to make for some captivating TV. But as it turned out, with the beard and the blood and the wound wasn't as big as I thought. You couldn't see my tongue at all, but it looked like I was smiling. Yeah. And Jim Ross said, look at that, he's smiling. And it really became this indelible image.
It really was.
Yeah.
Yeah. That, you know, you're like concerned about the human being's well-being, and then it looked like you were smiling. I'd be like, oh, I guess he's all right. was a sense of things.